Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, EmeraldPlanet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the EmeraldPlanet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the EmeraldPlanet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. and the United States as we're looking around the globe in 143 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices that can be used and the technologies, the services, and the products that will make a difference in the lives of the 7 billion souls we have on this planet. And we're talking about these best practices as we move forward to address the issue of severe climate change and how it's changing the lives of all these millions, many of which are in developing countries that have a need to know more about what is going on and to bring them into the mainstream as far as both environmental and economic development. Without new technologies and the processes and the products, we're not going to be able to improve their lives. And so what we're doing within this particular segment is what is climate change, how it affects the lives of others, and what is going on and what is being done today that will make a great difference. And we have the true expert sitting beside me, Dr. David Cleaves, who is, and his title is Climate Change Advisor to the Chief, and that's a mighty title that you have there, David. And this is part of the United States Forest Service, and it's a great pleasure having you here.
Great to be here, Sam.
And I've been looking to have you on this program for a long time, so I'm glad we've been able to work this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what is the U.S. Forest Service. A lot of people may or may not be aware of that, and of course the internationals would certainly like to know more about what's going on with the Forest Service. And a little bit of your background, but what is the United States Forest Service, and how does that fit within the schema of the U.S. Department of Agriculture?
Yes, Sam, we are, and I really appreciate being here this evening. It's great. I work for the U.S. Forest Service. It's part of the United States Department of Agriculture. We are we consider ourselves to be the nation's premier federal forest agency, and we do three major things, really. We manage about 193 million acres of national forest land. That's the management role that we have.
And that's a lot of land, and I understand there's some states in the West that may be a great chunk of the land area of the entire state is actually in the National Forest Service.
Yes, our public lands tend to be concentrated more in the West. However, we have national forests. We have 155 national forests and 20 national grasslands, actually all throughout the United States.
Now, what is the difference between the forest and the grasslands? That's an unusual distinction, and many countries will not have that distinction.
Yeah, well, the national forests have actually forest and grasslands on them, but they're designated as national forests. They came out of the Organic Act of 1897 and setting up in the forest reserves. Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot were the conservation leaders at that time.
And it's really interesting to know, David, that we talk about conservation and climate change and the environment in today's world, but actually the United States has been at this a long time, well over 100 years.
Yes, we have.
And actually even going back to the days of Thomas Jefferson and the founding of the country, as he was working through the Louisiana Purchase, there was a great emphasis then to identify all the natural resources and what could be done to incorporate, but also to protect those natural resources.
That's right. And the Lewis and Clark expedition, for example, went right through the heart of where we have many national forests now. And so that was really one of the first scientific explorations of what are now our national forests, national grasslands, and some of the other federal agencies also manage land in the West. But we also have national forests in the East. These were lands that were primarily purchased from tax rolls. They were delinquent tax rolls in the 30s. It was started by the Weeks Act of 1911, actually, and so we have about 20 million acres of national forest in the West, in which people can enjoy all the different services
You're
that
saying
national
in the
forest.
East.
In the East.
Right.
Yeah. Now the national grasslands are those 20 areas as a part of our system that are set up to manage grasslands as grassland systems. And we manage them. They're primarily grasslands and not forest, although there may be some forest land on them. But they provide important services to the public as well.
Let's
so we
bring
have
up
a whole
this
system.
first slide to show to our audience here, both domestic and internationally, some of the aspects as far as the United States Forest Service is concerned. And I need to adjust my slides here
okay,
so
great.
we can have that. And we'll get that in a minute. So anyway,
so
looking at this grasslands versus the forest, my understanding is that there's a real need for management and to allow you to really to incorporate the public in this. So you have this very much a great public-private partnership. And you have a good friend of mine, Wilhelmina Bratton, who is part
great.
of my,
she's great.
my Rotary Club.
Friend.
She's a fantastic lady, and I know she works in that whole area. So tell us a little bit about this public-private relationships you have and the importance of that.
Yeah. Well, Sam, and Wilhelmina is a good example because she's very much a people person. And so forest, what we do in and for and around the forest is really about the forest and about people. So our mission really is sustainability. And
right.
You see the mission on the slide there. It's really to sustain the health, productivity, diversity of the nation's systems, forest and grasslands, for current and future generations. And that means that we're managing the forest for people and with people. So the economic and sustainability is really a three-part mission. There's an ecological part to it, there's an economic part, and there's a social part. So and as we perceive and as we pursue that mission of sustainability, we try to bring the economic and the social and the ecological together in the National Forest System and in the other programs that we have too. We have two other major divisions. One that deals with providing technical and financial and other assistance to private landowners. And 60% of the nation's forest estate really is privately owned, especially that part in the east. So we have that part of our program, again, connected to people. And then the third piece is our research and development program. It's the largest forestry research and development program in the world, and we've done.
That's something, David, I don't think most people know about. One is the fact is the U.S. Forest Service exists because many people have the concept it's just part of the Park Service.
I see.
And there's that dichotomy, what's Park Service and what's the Forest Service. And then I think that because in many ways you guys are very entrepreneurial because you're working with private landowners. And also you're taking public lands and allowing this access to private interests, for grazing, for minerals and recreation and all these other things. Yeah. So it's something as where you actually really are stewards of public lands, working with the private sector to make sure that all of the public, 300 million plus citizens, have access to use all these lands in various ways.
Well, Sam, we should really talk about forests, not the forest, because the forests are very, very heterogeneous. There's all different kinds of forest, all different kinds of owners, all different kinds of objectives for those forests. So when we talk about what we do, it's really the Forest Service or the forest services to all these different kinds of forest. And so even if you look regionally, you'll see probably 5 or 6 big different kinds of forest. There's the southern forest, the northeastern hardwood forest, there's the forest of the interior west and the Rocky Mountains, the coastal forest, although in the Alaska forest, we even have the tropical forest. We have a national forest in Puerto Rico, a Yonke National Forest, and we have a new national forest in the Hawaiian Islands. So we span the range of different kinds of forest and different ownership.
And that's a tremendous biodiversity that you have within this this one composite system.
Yes.
And so when you go from Hawaii to, say, Maine, and you have everything in between, it's just absolutely incredible, the diversity that you have. And again, the diversity of services and diversity of uses that are going on with all these vast forests.
Yes, and in each one of these areas where we have different forest types, we also have different social economic systems, different cultures, if you will. So, and that are kind of tied very closely to the forest as an infrastructure, really. So that's why we are quite a decentralized organization. We have 33,000 employees in all of these, not only the national forests, but also in all of our 70 or 80 research laboratories. I can't remember the number now. And in our state and private organization offices that provide technical assistance to landowners. So we're spread out across the whole country, spanning that whole range of forest, plural, that are there and that are growing.
Well, and you're providing input into these local communities. I understand from my reading you have near 1,000 research scientists that are looking, again, across the whole swath of everything that's going with the United States Forest Service and giving input. But what I found really interesting is that you have a true international component embedded into everything you do, and I think that's something else that the publics, both within the United States and abroad, would find very interesting, is how the United States Forest Service then has such an international focus.
Yeah, we actually have a whole program, or if you want to call it a division, that deals with international issues. And they are a very active group of professionals that engage the expertise from the United States with other countries. Now, it's not just providing aid to other countries, because in many cases we're finding out that in those other countries there's a lot of innovation going on that we can learn from ourselves. That whole engagement is a very important role of our International Programs Office.
When we first met, this is the thing that I was really struck with our interaction, the fact that you're looking at all these other forest services around the globe, whether it's a country in Africa or South America or Southeast Asia, but you're really looking at them as their co-equals in the research and development and the nurturing of these forests, so that the entire globe, all of society, benefits from these. Yes. And I think that's a very fantastic mission that you have, that you're looking at it globally, but yet still coming from within the United States itself.
Well, I think we really can't afford to do otherwise. Because not only is we're all competing on a global scale, and the global and the economic commerce sends lots and lots of different species and different.
We're going to talk about that in our next segment, because we need to move on, but that goes very quickly. So thank you for being with us as we look around the globe as we create the Emerald Planet.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's? No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right,
What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet, coming to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States, as we're looking at the whole notion of the forest and the impact of the forest on soil and air and water quality. And then also looking at what are the many benefits of the forest. Many of us know that we have our pencils and we have our chopsticks made out of wood and 2x4s for our homes and, just 1,001 uses for the trees. But how does it really, in toto, really impact our lives? And there are many uses, and as we're moving forward through the 21st century, we're looking at the whole notion of climate change and what forests really mean to that. And as you know, being an old 4-H'er and starting out at 8 and 9 years old with forestry and conservation projects, we kind of embed the forestry and conservation in just about every program that we put on the Emerald Planet. But also we're sharing this around the globe in 143 other nations because as Dr. David Cleaves of the U.S. Forest Service, who is the climate change advisor to the chief, has been sharing with us is that they are really working with all these other nations really as co-equals in the research and development and the processing of everything that's going on in the forest. And I just think, David, what you're doing is just really wonderful with the U.S. Forest Service, and we're certainly blessed to have your leadership and those like Wilhelmina Bratton, who is a good friend of mine, and Robert Westover, who helped get you here after some months of trying to get you on our Emerald Planet television program. But let's just start off about this whole notion of climate change and the forest, and then why does the Forest Service really believe it needs to be involved in that process?
Yeah. Well, Sam,
let's bring up this first slide we have here for this, and we're going to start off with carbon because this is something that people have been sensitized to, David. This whole notion of CO2 and the carbon and the emissions. So let's just start off with this, and what does this mean, and then let's kind of back in, if you will, to climate change.
Well, the relationship, and there's a very relationship between the forest and the climate. The climate determines what the forest is and does and how it grows and what stresses it's under. And then the forest itself, because it takes carbon dioxide from the air and converts it into carbon and stores it into carbon in the trunks of the trees and in the forest soil and others, actually determines in some part what the climate will be.
I think it's fantastic what you're doing because we have, going back to what we talked about earlier, this 193 million acres that's actually under control and management of the United States Forest Service, and then 179 million acres of private land that you interact with private landowners. And, that's a huge carbon sump. We think about the Amazon basin. We think about, the forests of Southeast Asia and many other areas around the globe. But the United States itself really has a significant impact on the quality of the environment because we have these spread all over the continental United States and Hawaii and Alaska. And so this carbon sump really is something that's very real.
It's very real, and we just happen to have in the nation's forest a net carbon sink. That is, we're pulling more carbon dioxide out of the air than the forests are giving back, like in fires and insect and disease or other issues. So I think as long as we keep our forest healthy, we have regained down through the years what we call the sink strength of the forest to a level that's enviable. Actually, many countries look at us and they say, gee, we're having to fight deforestation in our country. and you folks are actually offsetting with your forest.
Well, we actually have a net gain of forest, as I understand it.
Yes, we have. Down through the years, we've kind of stabilized right now. So now we're at about a level where we want to keep it at that level in terms of the number of acres of forest. But the forests that are out there offset about anywhere between 12 to 14% of the fossil fuel emissions that of all other sources that occur. So this sink, or this sump that you're talking about there, is a very strong strategic asset for the country. Otherwise, we would be emitting 12% more carbon dioxide if it weren't for our forests, as long as we keep them healthy. Now, the issue here that comes along is that climate change itself creates stresses, or it at least spins up or revs up the stresses, like the fires and the insects and disease and the drought and these others that actually give our forests some problems in being able to maintain that sink strength.
Well, this whole thing about this last slide we have up here, as far as the wildland fires, we keep trying to protect the forest. On one hand, as public policy, people want to move their homes into the forest.
Yes.
They don't want to remove any of the debris and the old diseased trees and all that. And really all that's doing, and I know this from, we had a 1,200-acre farming operation, and if we didn't constantly be gleaning things out of the forest, we were just setting ourselves up for a forest fire as well. So it's very important to glean out of there and to be sure that what's left is healthy and get the disease out. And so how do we strike that delicate balance, David, where we're looking at what the forest can actually handle and at the same time to remove the fuel so that we don't have these devastating forest fires?
Well, we have to first understand that one forest is not like another, and that balance changes from one region to the other. And if you bring in the influence of climate change, that influence is going to be felt in different ways in different regions. So in some areas,
no one size fits all as far as a forest is concerned.
No, just as there's no one prescription for every patient that comes in to a doctor's office, there's really no one prescription or one strategy for every forest that we see or every set of climate change impacts on that forest. So we have to use our best knowledge and our experience to be able to look at those forests and say, okay, what kind of stressors are they under? How well are they growing? What's the impact of climate change going to be on that complex of stressors that they're already under? And what are we going to do about it? Can we manage it by actually thinning out that forest and making that forest more resilient or less susceptible to some of the impacts of those stresses? So it's not just about getting the forest there and leaving it alone. It's about actually assessing it and managing it.
Well, I was going to say, this is one of the credos of the U.S. Forest Service, is the management of these forests.
That's right.
And doing it so that you're counterbalancing with all these competing interests. Some people want it left exactly as it is. This is a native forest, which we know there are very few of true native forests.
Right.
Others, want to put their four-wheel all-terrain vehicles through it, and others want to hunt. Others want to be able to log, and others to graze their cattle or horses. So it's just amazing the competing interests that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, it is. And if we try to satisfy all those different needs on every acre, it would be impossible. So that's why over the years in particular we have developed more of an approach that was a landscape scale approach, so that these different forests, different uses get played out in more of a portfolio across the landscape, so that those areas that need to be preserved, like our wilderness system, and a good 14%, I believe, of our national forest system is wilderness, designated wilderness, then that's set aside for wilderness characteristics on the landscape and preserved and not actively managed as such. But right outside the boundaries of the wilderness area are private working lands that are managed to different levels and different degrees, and they all make up part of a landscape. That landscape, just as you wouldn't put all of your dollars into one stock on the stock market, you would put them into a portfolio of different stocks that are managed against a range of different risks and uncertainties. That's kind of that is the approach that we're taking in dealing with the forest landscape. So these different uses get played out in a little better fashion when you approach things at a landscape scale.
Yeah, and also, too, you're trying to do it in toto, so you're looking at it really as a system.
As a system,
not something
yes.
that's just discrete and separate from
Yes.
itself. But we only have about 3 minutes left, so let's look at this, the yellow cedar in Alaska and the threat of climate change. What are we looking at here, and what lessons are we learning from this in Alaska that we can extrapolate, even though it may be generalized, but what can we extrapolate across other forests here and abroad?
Yeah. Well, the lessons now, and the situation with yellow cedar in Alaska is that the root systems are very shallow and they're susceptible to late season frost. Okay, late season freezing. And when they had more snow over the root systems, they were actually protected from that. Now, as climate change comes along, the snow, more of the precipitation comes as rain, and the snow, and what does come as snow melts sooner, and those root systems are less protected, and they're more susceptible to climate change.
I see.
Okay. So what we're trying to learn from that is, okay, is there anything we can do to manage these stands so that they're less susceptible to climate change? Are there any individual yellow cedars that are more resistant to this kind of dieback?
So this goes back to research and development.
Right. So that this handoff from management to research and development and then back to management is a critical piece of how we approach problems. So we go out with the researchers and the managers go out and look at a problem like this together and say, how are we going to solve this? What can we learn from it? And then that starts the research cycle back up.
Well, looking at this, David, like the situation here, and I know there's no specific length of time and investment, but looking at the situation here, are we talking about several decades, a decade, or is it much longer than that as far as the research and then putting it into the management system itself?
Well, we have, it could be, we have some research that
we only have about a minute left.
Okay. We do the long-term research, and we're known for that. We've been doing research on some of our 81 experimental forests since 1911. But we also spin in science.
That's 100 years.
That's 100 years. We celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Fort Valley Experimental Forest down in Arizona just this last spring. But we do that long-term research, but then we also spin that into short-term applications as we blend it with science that other agencies do and that universities do. So we do both. We do long-term kind of basic science on the forest, and then we do short-term applied tool building for the managers today.
I tell you, I think it's fantastic, and this whole relationship with the private landowners, the United States Forest Service, and then drawing in the universities and other research stations from the states and even the local cities and counties. That's tremendous, David. Thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer. No family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us on the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. and the United States. And as we work with the many forest services and the forest around the globe in 143 different nations. As you know, our stated goal is to identify those 1,000 best practices that can be used, the best technologies, the services, the products, and the people that are making the difference as we move through the 21st century. And how do we address the issues of climate change, and what are some of those key elements of that? And of course, as we know, one of the key elements which many of us just take for granted, often ignore, particularly in North America and some areas of Asia and South America, are forests. But the forest really is a linchpin as far as the quality of the air, the water, and the soil that's around us. And so what we do in one nation certainly makes a difference and has an impact in all the other over 200 nations around the globe, many of those which are actually trying to now create forests, such as in Haiti, which has less than 2% of its land mass under forest. And I have with me Dr. David Cleaves, who is with the U.S. Forest Service. He is a climate change advisor to the chief and just doing tremendous work, and he has a fantastic group that's working on the whole notion of climate change. And David, thank you for being with us. And we wanted to close out with this research and development and open up here in this next segment. And we have this slide I want to bring up and talk about that, the what's called the 5 fingers of death. I'm not sure our audience wants to start off with a death picture, but it certainly is symbolic. But this is also not just symbolic, it's very, very real.
Yes, it's very real, and we have in the U.S., in the interior West, we have 17 million acres of forest that are now dying because it's been under attack by bark beetles. So those bark beetle infestations were exacerbated, made worse by a change in climate, a more arid situation that put trees under stress and made them more susceptible.
Well, it's more arid, and also understanding it's warmer around these trees, and so many trees that were actually over many millennia developed at certain latitudes and altitudes now. Actually, they're in a new climatic zone as we move through the 21st century, and they're finding it very difficult to cope.
Well, they're under stress, and also the insects themselves, the bark beetles themselves, were killed off by having very cold winters in the past, so that there was a mechanism in there to keep things from getting really bad.
So the cold actually was a natural predator for the bark beetle.
It was, and as things get warmer, as the low temperatures in the winter actually creep up, then that mechanism is not working against the beetles anymore. So they have more generations per year than they used to, and so there's more of them there to infest the trees. So we have quite a problem with both fires and with insects and disease on our forests, particularly in the interior West, where the climate change plays out as drying things out and warming things up more rapidly.
Well, looking at these trees we have here, David, too, as you have more infestation and more disease, then that's just going to add fuel, no pun intended, to the fires that are coming into these areas, because a green, healthy tree is more resistant to the fire than you have a tree that's very dry and it's really sitting there almost as kindling instead of being a live and vibrant tree.
And the relationship between the fire and the insect and disease is something that we're actually putting more effort in studying, because those connections are made even closer by climate change. What this picture showed was one of our experimental forests. I mentioned we had 81 experimental forests. This was the Fraser Experimental Forest in Colorado.
And we need to put in here, David, just as a memory, that these experimental forests go back to 1911.
Yeah, the oldest.
1911. That's over 100 years old now.
Right. Yes, the oldest ones do. The Fraser goes back into the 1940s. They were, but you notice that some of those trees in that were still green, because those experimental forests outline or measure the impacts of different forest treatments on things like insect and disease susceptibility, and then in turn on the impacts on the watershed below. So that what you saw was an instrumented watershed in the Fraser Experimental Forest, and now our ability to say, okay, what do these different treatments in the watershed do, and how does it end up impacting the water itself?
Now, you and I know what a watershed is, and we're using this term interchangeably here in expressing, but many in our audience may not be aware of actually what is a watershed. So let's just define the term watershed, and then we'll get back into the cycle, because we know that trees, again, are a linchpin for this air, water, and soil quality that we have here and every country around the globe. But what is a watershed, and then how do the trees relate to a watershed?
Well, a watershed, and a watershed can be of any different size, but it's an area of land from which the water flows into the streams and down to water users. So it can be a very relatively small area with a small stream draining from it. It can be relatively large area. And there's a whole system called the hydrologic unit code system that grades watersheds from different scales. They're kind of nested in one another.
And many people don't realize that actually just a little area out behind their house in a cul-de-sac with some cattails and a few trees and some native grasses and all that is a tiny little watershed into itself. All the way something as huge as the Mississippi River or
is a watershed.
The Mississippi Delta and all this. And these are all watersheds, and each one is precious.
Each one, and each one has its own kind of state of health, so to speak. So the state of health of that watershed really determines the quality and the quantity of the water and the aquatic systems that flow from it. So, and many of our watersheds are forested watersheds, or at least they have a forest component. So the condition of the forest really determines the condition of the watershed and the water.
Let's go back to this slide, and because we have this very nice graph, and maybe, David, you can walk us through what we're looking at here as far as this cycle, and let's just start at the very beginning and just walk our audience all the way through this.
Yeah, Sam, what we're doing with responding to climate change in the Forest Service is that we've organized ourselves around, well, what changes do we have to make now that we've got this signal, this big warning, this science that tells us, there's some changes underway here. And we need to be responsive to those changes. And we don't need to be 10, 20, 30 years from now saying, we should have caught that. We should have done something. Because then the cost, ecological, social, economic costs are much greater. So we're organizing in the forest, and we have organized around what we call a roadmap. And this roadmap is basically our strategy for taking what we do and shaping it around the new things that we're learning about how the climate change is affecting us. So, and it's divided up into three separate types of activities. One is assessment activities, where we're actually taking a look at, for example, the conditions of the watersheds. And we just finished work on 15,000 watersheds that have Forest Service ownership in them, and grading the conditions of those watersheds and showing, well, what are the stressors involved, and how does climate change influence those stressors, and which ones do we address first? So we're just as any good doctor would, we first look at the patient. We first
diagnose what we think maybe what's going on, the assessment, and then the next step in this process?
The next step then is to manage. That is, what are we going to do about it? We think we know what the problem is. Let's just don't go riding off on all directions. Let's prescribe what we need to prescribe for a particular watershed or particular forest stand. that meets what we think are the most important stressors on that forest.
And again, this is just like having a physician having a patient. Okay, yes. We assess, we diagnose what we believe is the issue, and then we start our treatment process. Yes. At the same time, we're doing the research about and taking samples and those kinds of things.
And monitoring.
And monitoring what's going on.
The take this pill and come back in the morning. This is the come back in the morning piece. This
and of course, you guys will come back in the morning 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, because it's very long term in what you're doing.
It's long term, and we have a forest inventory and analysis program that every 3 miles throughout the forest of the entire United States, we measure plots repeatedly. It's the forest census, and that census allows us to look at the forest and say, well, this is what's happening over a long period of time. Those graphs that I showed you before really came from forest inventory and analysis. That's part of the monitoring piece.
And then the third piece is?
The monitoring is the third
monitoring
place.
Is the third
assess, manage, monitor. It's just over and
over and over and over. Yeah. And the whole thing about this is 100 years plus. You've been doing this. You're one of the few agencies within the United States government that really has this long-term institutional memory that is needed. And many people think like, when the president and the Congress changes, well, we can change our policies and all that. Yeah. But if you're going to sustain a nation, and this is true for every country around the globe, you have to have this long-term institutional memory so that people know what happened before, where we are today, and then where do we project that we want to be in the future. And that's the hard part, is having this continuity over 100 plus years.
Yeah, and that is one of the assets of the Forest Service and the work that's going on before us. So it's a matter really of reading the forest and making sure that policies that are developed are really based on the best possible information about the forest and about the impacts of forest management.
And what are we looking at here, David? Because we have about a minute and a half left.
This is an example, I believe, this is an example of our recent watershed analysis on 15,000, what we call 6th hydrologic unit code watersheds that have Forest Service land on them. So what we'll do now, what we are doing, is develop plans of action for those watersheds that have the highest risk levels. So it's a comparative risk rating, if you will. And we just finished that on the National Forest System.
So this is something that's very new.
It's very new, but it's an example of that assess and then going right on into a prescription describing what we're going to do to manage it, and that management's not all equal.
And looking at this watershed restoration and recovery, I know this is really a big issue we've just talked about here, and this is something that really needs to be done not only in the United States, but countries all over the globe. And I would say, David, this is probably one of the hardest things for the people and taxpayers to realize that, we're all part of this. And this is something we have to sponsor and use because this is just part of our life. And we're going to come back in another segment. We'll talk about this climate change scorecard. And then we want to talk about the future of the Forest Service and what we need to be doing. Because we're looking at this, David, with David Cleaves, as we look around the globe, as we help to create the Emerald Planet.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800-RUNAWAY.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. Each week, looking at the various topics that are going on around the globe as well as within the United States, looking at climate change, alternative energy production, education, health, food security, all the issues that face the 7 billion souls that inhabit the earth, and how we're going to actually expand and broaden the natural resources and the man-made resources that are available to each of these citizens. Because as we've known in North America and most of Western Europe and some areas of Asia and South America, is that we've enjoyed a very good lifestyle over the last several hundred years. But as we move through the 21st century and all the stresses of an expanding population, a decrease in the natural resources, how do we bring about that fine, delicate balance between what we're using and actually how can we enhance and at the same time expand the technologies and intellectual properties that are going to bring about increased comfort and not lessen the opportunities for everyone on the planet. I have sitting with me Dr. David Cleaves, who's with the United States Forest Service, and he has a very long title, which is Climate Change Advisor to the Chief. And David, it's really great having you with us,
Great.
and the information you're sharing about climate change, but using the model of what's going on in the Forest Service is just absolutely fantastic. And let's just go in because we're going to have a very quick run here. What is this climate change scorecard, and how does that really relate to each individual so they feel like that's my scorecard on my environment that affects my community?
Yeah. Well, Sam, we really look at wrestling with the climate change or the response to climate change as a change in lifestyle for an organization. Okay, so it's such a big driver of so many things that we have to weave into what we're doing our response to it. So we developed a tool called the Scorecard that basically allows us to score ourselves as an organization.
But in a sense, the outcome of that, too, is you're scoring the forest, you're scoring the communities within which these forests and the grasslands that we now realize are out there and viable part of the U.S. Forest Service. And then also it allows the local citizens, to, in a sense, to be able to score themselves and how well their local communities are doing in relationship to the forests and grasslands that are managed.
Well, we're starting it. We're not imposing it on anybody, but we're starting it to say, you know, what would be a balanced approach to climate change response? Not a separate organization. We don't want to set up a separate organization, spend a bunch of money on a separate organization. We want to weave it into what we're doing. But how would we do that in a balanced way, in an energetic way? So we developed a scorecard, and it comes from the business theory, actually, of balanced scorecard approaches. A lot of big companies use it to translate strategy into action. And we said, what are the four components? Well, the first one is capacity building.
Now let's go right to this slide so we can bring that up, and let's highlight this slide that we have right here. Okay, David, just we'll keep this up for a while, and let's just use this as our template.
Okay, so this all comes from our USDA goal of dealing with climate change and water, goal number 2. And we're saying, how are we going to do that? Well, there's 4 different components to that. One is that we have to build agency capacity. It doesn't necessarily mean build a bigger agency, but build our ability to deal with climate change. That's that blue ball up on the top of that. So, and we go about that by employee education, coordination of climate change, and we have about 120 climate change coordinators that cover all of the national forests now. So we have quite an organization within an organization of people who are dealing with weaving climate change.
So when we start our the Emerald Trek, we can actually go to these different sites, interact with these coordinators for climate change, and actually report from the site then back through our Channel 10 TV, but out to the world about what's going on actually within these discrete forests where these coordinators are located.
Right. And those folks now are working on their report on the scorecard in total, so they'll be able to say, this is what's going on the Lewis and Clark National Forest, on the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, on the San Juan, on the Olympic National Forest. So they're making it kind of all climate change is local. As it
really is.
As it really is.
Yeah, and also relates to the world.
This is leadership. So then the second dimension there, the orange one on the right, is one of engagement. We can't do this alone. We need citizens involved with us. We need other federal agencies and other state agencies and NGOs involved with us. And we need the research community involved with us. So we're scoring ourselves on our ability to build creative and productive relationships and partnerships to help get this job done. Because on any landscape, we share that landscape with all the others. It's not just a Forest Service thing.
Well, and that's the whole thing about it, David, and I think this is something that we forget about, is how that we have this interaction, and we must make all stakeholders, when I say make, it really is invite them and encourage them to be a part of this whole process, but in turn you want them to respond back to you and say, this is what we're seeing, this is the impacts it's having in our lives, and this is how we can become engaged and work with the Forest Service and all the other agencies and organizations that are out there on a day-to-day basis doing this, as their professional work.
That's exactly right. We just can't afford, no one agency, no one organization, no one landowner can afford to kind of crawl inside their shell and say, well, we're just going to let this blow over. It requires all of the muscle that we have.
This is the proverbial ostrich head in the sand. As far as climate change, that's not going to work.
That won't work, and we need all the sensors that we have, people watching.
Okay, go to the next one, the light green.
The light green at the bottom, that is adaptation. So really dealing with climate change, dealing with the effects of climate change is really about dealing with risks, dealing with stressors. How are we going to do that? Well, first you have to assess those stressors. That's the vulnerability assessment piece of it. Then we have to design, as we talked about, the appropriate activities for dealing with those stresses. Then we have to monitor. So that's all about adapting to a changing climate. And if you don't do that, and you don't do it well, you can't do anything in terms of using the carbon as a forest sink. Because an unhealthy forest is not a very good carbon sink. It's not a good carbon
Well, and
sink
that's
at
really
all.
important too. And the whole thing about it, as far as I call it a sump, you're calling it a sink.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that we need to have this large footprint, and hopefully an expanding footprint, so that it's actually drawing more carbon out of the air as we produce more carbons, until we can go to the renewables and be less based on the fossil fuels as far as our economy and lifestyle is concerned.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as we have to realize, is that really is what's protecting the air and the soil and the water quality today, but also generations into the future.
Yeah, we call it carbon plus. So the forest provides carbon, but it provides a whole range of other ecosystem services. And those ecosystem services, the watershed services that we talked about, the recreation services, the financial forest system has 173 million recreation visitors every year.
What was that number again?
173 million recreation.
That is an absolutely incredible number. I mean, that's over half the population of the United States.
Well, that's a lot of folks recreate on the national forest. And so, and a lot of people, of course, recreate on private forest also, but that's just one of the range of ecosystem services that are provided by the forest. So you might say that the carbon that's in the forest is charismatic carbon. It's carbon that provides a lot of other uses and services, and managing that range of uses and services means we're going to have to make some pretty tough trade-offs sometimes, and we need good information. Now, the last part of the scorecard, which is the green on the darker green there on the left, is really about mitigation and sustainable consumption. Mitigation meaning using the forest as a carbon sink to contribute to the solution of the climate change problem itself. And we talked some about just about 12% of our fossil fuel emissions are offset by the nation's forest. We want to keep that forest healthy. And part of what the National Forests are doing under the Scorecard system is taking stock of what the health of that carbon sink is on each and every forest. Then the last piece there is sustainable operations or sustainable consumption, is that we have a very big organization. It's spread out all over the place. We got lots of trucks. We have lots of facilities. We should be, and we are, leading to the citizens that are around us that we work for, our taxpayers, in reducing our energy footprint, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions footprint, our water footprint. In other words, we are leading in our own behavior, in addition to managing the forest, how we manage ourselves.
I was going to say this is something very important. When I was in Austria the last 2 weeks, and we produced 4 television shows from there, and they are really the leaders as far as Europe. And actually, they have the slogan, Austria, the green heart of Europe.
I see.
And so that was really fantastic. But looking at the e-vehicles that they have, of course, they have the scooters and motorcycles and the cars we think of. But yet they have delivery vans, they have buses, they have taxis. If there's a vehicle, they're now experimenting and actually getting some of this into mass production.
I see.
And so this is one way, again, maybe the United States Forest Service may be already doing this kind of research as far as using what they call e-mobility methods of transportation, delivery, and then they're doing alternative delivery times, so you don't have all the carbon coming in and out of the parks at the same time and in the forest.
Yes, I think we've got a lot of creativity in all of these areas of the scorecard being kind of unleashed there. We've got some very entrepreneurial and very smart folks in the Forest Service now that are using this scorecard not as any kind of a grade card as much as it is to say, well, okay, now we can try some new things out.
Benchmark, more or less.
Benchmark. And 2011 will be our benchmark, and our goal is to get to a 70%, or 7 out of 10 of these questions on every national forest answered yes in 2015. So we're marching forward on this. And we're quite excited about it, actually. It's well, and
it really gives you. It's kind of like the beacon into the darkness. It allows you to say, here we are. We know where we are. We're on the shoals of this whole notion, what's called severe climate change, going around the globe. But yet, this beacon of light, this beacon of hope, is going out and actually illuminating the challenges that are out there. But at the same time, what are going to be the resources that we need, what we have, and then how we're going to ameliorate this for the future. So we have about 15 seconds left. Dr. David Cleaves, what would you like to leave with our viewers?
Well, I think our viewers, if on their way home from school or work, they look outside their window and look at the forest and ask themselves some questions. How healthy do you think that forest is? Who owns it? Who works in it? Who plays in it? Everybody has a piece of the forest.
Thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.